In ProVault, separate property is only addressed if the matter type involves the current marriage. If the matter is an APR case or post-decree, all assets are considered separate. In these cases, if your client co-owns a property with the other party, ProVault handles it as a partial ownership.
If you made a mistake when you added your client, you can correct your client's matter type in the matter page.
We start with your client logging in.
ProVault addresses separate property in each asset section. At the end of each asset item, ProVault asks your client 2 questions. Did either you or your spouse own this property before you were married? And did either you or your spouse receive this property as a gift or inheritance? If your client answers yes to either one of these questions, ProVault interviews your client about this separate property item. What was the value at acquisition? Any debt at acquisition? And so on. Attorneys have expressed that, since separate property is such a complex issue, they want to be responsible for determining whether an asset item will be considered separate property and how much they will claim as separate property. For that reason, ProVault never asks your client outright if they have any separate property or how much of the asset should be considered separate. When your client has completed the interview, they are finished and the issue passes to the law firm. Now we will show you how the firm member will address separate property. After a firm member has logged in, he will go into the client's questionnaire in the existing client screen by selecting Edit. All asset items for which your client answered yes to one of the separate property questions show up in its corresponding asset summary page with an ownership of your client's name or the opposing party's name. Firm members address separate property in the separate property page in the Assets section. This page only shows up for firm members. In the separate property summary page, all asset items for which your client answered yes to one of the separate property questions show up. If an item should show up as separate property but does not, simply go to the item, select yes to one of the separate property questions, complete the necessary information, and it will appear in the separate property summary page. Clicking the item or the edit link takes you to the separate property detail page for that asset item. Here you may select how you want to claim the separate property. The first option is the standard calculation. The standard calculation claims the equity value at the time of marriage or acquisition as separate property and any increase in equity at the current date as marital property. If the equity amount has gone down since the marriage or acquisition, the separate property amount is the current equity and the marital property is 0. The second option is claiming the asset item as all separate property. This option claims the current equity as separate property and $0 as marital property. The third option is claiming the asset item as all marital property. This option claims $0 as separate property and the current equity as marital property. With the fourth option, the firm member can enter any amount as separate property, and the remaining equity will be calculated as marital property by ProVault. With the comments field, you can enter any comment you want to show up on the sworn financial statement for that separate property item.